Hi guys, it is April from Getting Hooga With It. Today we're doing another Konmari with me, which means we are decluttering my bookshelves. Let's get into it. So if you don't know, this is like, I don't even know what number we're on for Konmari with me, but I'm decluttering my bookshelves in a major way because they've been bringing me some, I don't know if anxiety is the word, that might be a little bit too extreme. But basically, I go to my shelves and I don't like what I see because it's overwhelming. So I'm going shelf by shelf and decluttering, and I'm only keeping the books that bring me joy. Hence the KonMari, Marie Kondo kind of method. So I have a couple of rules for myself. For every shelf, I can keep 20 books. Now, I chose 20 because otherwise it becomes ridiculous. They're like double stacked, overwhelming. So I can keep 20, and I can also put 2 on my limbo shelf. If I'm just not sure at this time how I feel about a book, I can just throw it on the limbo shelf. But I do have to deal with it at some point. If I go over 20, then I have to go to my limbo shelf and take something off of my limbo shelf and get rid of it. So today we're doing gothic books. Now, they're gothic to me. So to me, a gothic-y kind of book is dark and brooding. Think like Daphne du Maurier. Kate Morton is another one that I always classify as gothic because there's usually a house involved, some sort of mystery involved. That's what I think of when I think of gothic literature. I recognize it's more Jane Eyre. I get that. This is like my own version. And we have, funny enough, 20 books on that shelf at this moment. That means I could just walk away and not even do this video, but that's not the point. We're gonna try and declutter even knowing I could keep them all. We're gonna do it. So, the first book is The Lake of Dreams by Kim Edwards. Kim Edwards wrote The Memory Keeper's Daughter, which I still haven't read. But this follows a woman who is kind of in a point of transition in her life. I think she moves from Japan to New York, and she goes to her family home. Her father used to own it. Her father has died. She's still like reeling from that as well. And she's kind of going there to regroup. She discovers this little nook in the window seat where it's locked. She opens it and she finds all of these objects, and each of them seem to bring her more information about her family's history. I think there's a link to the suffragette movement, and that's intriguing to me. I'm gonna have a hard time with this shelf because mysteries like this always intrigue me. So I don't know, but I gotta keep The Lake of Dreams. Next up is The Orchid House by Lucinda Riley. I have not read any Lucinda Riley yet, but a lot of people say if you like Kate Morton, you'll like Lucinda Riley. And there's a reason for that. It takes place in 2 different time periods. We follow, in the present day, Julia Forrester, who's a concert pianist. She goes to this estate called Wharton Park. She went there a lot when she was a child, and she goes back to it as an adult after her husband and her young child die. She's completely grieving. And she meets a man there named Kit Crawford, and they together discover an old diary that her grandmother wrote in. It was her grandmother's diary, and it brings her into the 1940s where we discover this love affair that happened between Henry, a former heir to Wharton Park, and this woman that he marries named Olivia. And those 2 people are separated during World War II. It sounds interesting. There's not a major mystery here. This sounds more like a love story than anything else. I don't usually get on with that. I'm going to put this in the limbo pile right now because I just don't know. Next up is The Secret Keeper by Kate Morton. I really genuinely enjoyed this Kate Morton. This takes place during World War II, and we're diving into the mystery that surrounds three people, Dorothy, Vivian, and Jimmy. Now, we flash back and forth in time, so the storyline that takes place in World War II is one, and one of the characters in there, Dorothy, is actually the mother of our main character, Laurel Nicholson. I think Dorothy is dying, or she's very elderly, and there is this mystery surrounding her, and a particular picnic, or it's like a family party that happens where I think someone is stabbed or something along those lines. Something really traumatic happens, and Laurel witnesses it happen when she's like 16. And so she's carried this secret and this confusing part around her mother for years and years and years. Her mom is super old now, and she's finally getting this details about her mother's past, her mother's very interesting past. I really enjoyed this, and I could see myself reading this again one summer, years from now, so I'm going to keep The Secret Keeper. The Lavender Garden is another one by Lucinda Riley. This again has a bit of a love story in it, but it's got a bit more than that. So it takes place in 1998 in France. And we meet Emily, who inherits her childhood home, which is an enormous chateau. Lucky girl. Unfortunately, it also comes with a lot of debt and many, many questions about the chateau and the history of the family. And then we flash backwards in time to Paris, 1944, and we meet Constance Carruthers, who is sent undercover to Paris to be a part of Churchill's Special Operations Executive during the Nazi occupation of France. She stumbles kind of into this family who seem to entertain members of the Nazi regime frequently enough. And it is about her experience there. I think there is a love story in there, but the rest of it sounds so good. I'm going to keep this for sure. The House at Riverton by Kate Morton. This is the only Kate Morton I have not read yet, and I'm keeping it 100%. This follows Grace when she's just a little girl working as a servant at Riverton House. She is very close to the daughters of this home named Hannah and Emmeline, and there is this gorgeous party that happens in the summer of 1924, and a young poet at this party shoots himself. The only witnesses are Hannah and Emmeline, and they, I think, confide in Grace what exactly happened, and I think we unravel what happened. I think it sounds wonderful, and I'm completely keeping this. The Wildling Sisters by Eve Chase is about, again, two different timeline storylines. There's something about that reminds me of, there's something gothic about it. We follow a 15-year-old named Margot, and she and her three sisters go to this big manor called Applecote Manor in July of 1959, where their aunt and uncle live. Now, their aunt and uncle are completely grieving by the loss of their daughter. She has disappeared. I don't know what kind of sister or brother sends their children off to a grieving family like that, but anyway, they go. It's clearly not the highlight of the summer. It's like a difficult summer, and Margot is trying to find out what happened to her cousin as well. So we follow them, and then we also follow Jessie 50 years later. So she asks her husband to go to this estate with her just to get out of London, and they start to hear a lot of rumors about the house itself. It sounds really great, so I'm going to keep this one. Next is The 13th Tale, which I have read and really loved. This is about a very elderly woman who is on the brink of death. She's this beloved writer, but she, in interviews with journalists, she never tells the real story of her life. They'll ask her about her life, and she'll make up stories. But she decides to tell the truth to Margaret Lee, who is a biographer, but she's not like a prolific biographer. They meet, and she does tell her true story, and this is the story of her life, and it was very gothic, and I really enjoyed it, so I'm keeping this. Black Rabbit Hall is another book by Eve Chase, and this is about a group of siblings who spend the summer at Black Rabbit Hall. There is a major event that happens one stormy evening in 1968. This very close-knit family begins to unravel because of this one event. And then we follow a woman 3 decades later called Lorna Dunaway. She has decided for sure she wants to get married at Black Rabbit Hall. But as she's drawn deeper into the history of the hall itself and the grounds, all sorts of information about her mother, who I believe is one of those kids, comes up. And so I need to know. I just need to know. I am not doing well at this, but I'm keeping Black Rabbit Hall. And I'm also keeping Tangerine because, my goodness, this is the best summer read. This might be like the epitome of summer. This is about a woman in the 50s-ish or the 40s. She moves to Tangier, and she moves there with her husband, and then her college roommate shows up. They didn't end on the best of terms, but I mean, they were very, very close during college. She shows up and she's like, well, I can't get rid of her. And this woman soon unravels her life, and it's about their relationship together. It is a slow burning story. This was marketed as a thriller. I would not call it a thriller. It's much more gothic. But it does have a lot of mystery surrounding it, and I just adored every second of reading this book. So I try to pry this out of my hands. There's no way. The Lake House by Kate Morton. This was my first Kate Morton, and I really enjoyed it. I don't think this is everyone's favorite, but I loved it. This takes place in 1933. There's this big party that happens. There are fireworks going off, and during that night, the 11-month-old baby, family's baby, Theo, has vanished from his crib, and it is about trying to find out the mystery of it. Many years later, we follow Alice 70 years later trying to figure out what in the world happened to this little boy. I really loved this book. I'm keeping it. So Affinity is next by Sarah Waters. This was my first Sarah Waters that I ever read, and I loved it so much. This is about a woman who visits another woman in prison. She's kind of volunteering, and this woman she meets in prison is in there because she was a spiritualist and something went wrong at one of her seances. I read this years ago, like I think I might have been 19 or 20, and I was so sucked in. It's about the story of these women's relationship with one another, and it feels dark and clammy because you're in this prison. It was amazing. I loved Affinity. This is the type of book that I should probably reread at some point, so of course I'm keeping it. My Cousin Rachel by Daphne du Maurier. Keeping. This is about the story of two cousins. One of the cousins has to go away for his health. He meets a woman there. Her name is Rachel. He falls in love and then he dies. And Rachel comes to the home that she was supposed to inherit and move in with her husband, and meets this cousin, and there is major tension, and Was she involved in the death of her husband? Yes? No? Who is Rachel? So good. Next up is The House on the Strand, also by Daphne du Maurier, but I have not read this one. This says, when Dick Young's friend Magnus offers him an escape from his troubles in the form of a new drug, Dick finds himself transported to the Cornish manor of Tywardreath in the 14th century. As Dick witnesses the intrigues of the court there, he becomes fixated with Roger and the captivating Isolde Carmineau, and withdraws from the modern world to spend more and more time in the past. Is this time travel? Is this Daphne du Maurier? I don't know what in the world. I didn't know Daphne du Maurier did time travel, but I feel like if anyone could make me like that theme in books, it would probably be Daphne. So I'm going to keep it. I'm nervous about it. Should this go on the limbo pile? I'll put it on the limbo pile. We'll see. Next up is Wildflower Hill by Kimberly Freeman. This is about a woman named Emma. She's a ballerina that lives in London. Her grandmother dies, and she leaves her this sheep station in isolated rural Australia. She has no idea why her grandmother left her this. So she goes to Australia to like sort out whether she wants to keep it or not. She at least wants to see it. And I think her grandmother left it there so that her heart would remain open. This sounds way too love story-esque from me, so I'm just going to get rid of it because no, I'm not a love story person. Where are the people dying? The Distant Hours by Kate Morton is another book that I really enjoyed. This follows a woman who doesn't know her mother that well. A letter arrives for her mother. Her mother retreats to her room, and like it really affects her. And she's trying to understand her mom more, and she discovers that her mom spent a whole summer during World War II with these sisters. It might have been longer than a summer. When the kids were sent basically out of the cities during World War II to try and save them, she's one of those kids, and there is something major that happened during her stay with these sisters, and I really enjoyed it, so I'm keeping it. Mary Ann is another one by Daphne du Maurier. Now, I think this book is about the history and the story of Daphne du Maurier's ancestor. It says that Mary Ann finds the single most rewarding way she can rise above her miserable Cockney world. She will become the mistress to a royal duke. In doing so, she provokes a scandal that rocks Regency England. And that just sounds great, and it's Daphne du Maurier, so I'm keeping it. Another Daphne du Maurier. The first one I read, and my goodness, probably the best one I've read so far, is Rebecca by Daphne du Maurier. This follows a woman who meets a man. They fall in love really quickly. She marries him very quickly and goes to stay with him at his estate, Manderley. But she doesn't realize how much this man's first wife, who died, would be kind of all over the grounds of Manderley. All of the servants there absolutely loved the first Mrs. De Winter, and her name is Rebecca, and she's just everywhere and so atmospheric, so good. Keeping. Oh yeah, I forgot about this one, The Vanishing by Wendy Webb. This is about a very creepy house. Julia Bishop is asked to take care of this elderly woman, and she realizes it's Amaris Sinclair, who's a horror novelist, and everyone thought that she had died, but she's not. She's living and she's breathing and she's right before her, and she has to take care of her. She starts to realize that there is something mysterious going on surrounding this woman in this big old house, and it just sounds creepy and wonderful, and I'm absolutely keeping it. Now there's also The Historian by Elizabeth Kostova. I think there's like a vampire-esque story to this, but it's not horror, if that makes any sense. It says, late one night, exploring her father's library, a young woman finds an ancient book in a cache of yellowing letters addressed ominously to my dear and unfortunate successor. And she plunges into a world about her father's past, and her mother's mysterious fate connected to some sort of evil. I'm absolutely keeping this. Now, I do have to say, it's yellowing and not the best of copies, so if I find a better copy of The Historian, I'll probably pick it up. But that just sounds too good to not have. Jamaica Inn by Daphne du Maurier. My sister read this recently and gave this to me and really liked it. This follows Mary Yellen, who goes to Jamaica Inn, where her aunt Patience lives. And she discovers that the inn is actually a front for a lawless gang of criminals. And this is about smuggling and murder. And she gets entangled in the whole thing. So of course I'm keeping that too. I've done terribly with this haul, haven't I? I've gotten rid of one book, so that brings it down to 19 books. And then I do have 2 books for my limbo shelf. I've got The House on the Strand by Daphne du Maurier. Realistically, how am I ever going to get rid of a Daphne du Maurier? But then I also have The Orchid House by Lucinda Riley. So I'm going to throw those on the limbo shelf. We'll see where they land and what happens to them in the end. So that means that I have, what is that now? 17 books on the shelf. It went from 20 to 17. So not so bad, not great either. Let's be real, not great. I hope that you guys enjoyed this. Let me know in the comments below how you would have fared. What would you have gotten rid of? Because this was just too hard for me. Yeah, I'd love to know in the comments below, and I will talk with you guys soon. Bye.